NARASA guidelines, the NARASA chairperson appoints a committee for the most part, and one of the appointed committee members is the program chair, and who is Matt, which, by the way, give Matt and his committee a large round of applause. And we just kind of looked at each other when it came time to deciding who the Saturday evening speaker would be, and we kind of just knew that was the right fit. And of course, Matt brought it to the committee, and they approved it as well. But we just kind of knew it would be the right fit. And I've personally known Billy for a while, and I feel like we got a lot in common. I feel like he has a lot to offer. And I think if you haven't heard him, you're in for a little treat tonight. And if you had heard him before, he'll probably bring up some things that are new to you. So please help me welcome Billy.
I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's January the 5th of 1990. My home group is the Early Morning AA Literature Discussion Group in Atlanta. We meet at 7:30 a.m. every morning if you happen to be down there. I want to thank the committee, an awesome NARASA. It's funny. A couple of things go through my mind as I'm here today or tonight. Someone asked me at the table I was sitting if we discussed a manuscript at my dinner table. And I just laughed because I was sitting with Craig and Rich. We just argued over the Patriots and the Giants and the Yankees. And no AA topic ever came up at our table. But I say that because if you were to go home at my office at my house, you would see that in a very prominent place on the left-hand side across from my desk is a book that's called The First 100 Years of the Red Sox or something like that. And one would ask why I have that book in my office, because I hate the Red Sox, to be perfectly honest. But I have it there to remind me sometimes that sometimes we get so caught up in individual AA issues and we forget about the people that make up, AA and obviously NARASA. I had the privilege of speaking at the 75th anniversary of Alcoholics Anonymous in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. And as I prepared to speak at that event, which was awesome, obviously what came to my attention is one of the most famous AA members. There's really two if you dig down into the archives. There's the guy who left Philadelphia and went to Ireland and brought AA there. But the other one is Jimmy Burwell. His story is a vicious cycle inside the big book. And as I did more research into him, it really taught me a lesson because, as a lot of people in this room might know, Jimmy Burwell is probably one of the most vocal atheists that had anything to do with writing the big book. If you read the stories of other people that were on that, I use committee, I'm not even sure they call themselves a committee, they would tell you Jimmy Burwell is even a bigger pain in the ass than he admits to being. He drew a couple of lines in the sand. Like I told you, Jimmy Burwell's story is a vicious cycle. In that same big book, you will find a story called Our Southern Friend. Our Southern Friend is the story of Fitzmayu. Fitzmayu's story was deemed to be so religious that in the second, third, and fourth edition, it's missing the last couple of paragraphs that are in the first edition. They took them out. So here's two men back from when AA started. One story is so Christian, they take out a couple of paragraphs. One is like the poster child atheist agnostic. But those two men are buried in the same cemetery. Those two men were best friends. How they worked AA, how they viewed AA, did not get in the middle of their respect for each other as AA members. And sometimes I think in the AA world we have today, we have so many different cliques and sections and this person likes this and this person thinks this, and sometimes we divide our friendships by that. And I'm not sure it was ever supposed to be that way. You know, I probably am a little caught off guard tonight because, you know, a lot of times I'll tell people, because there's a question I get sometimes is, what did you learn when you were a trustee? What did you learn when you were a director or an appointed committee member? Or what did you learn while you served? And that's a very easy question to answer, but my answer is usually not expected by the people who ask it. Now, tonight I get up here after getting a text from my friend Cynthia that her brother passed away from this disease. And I say that because of my answer, that when people say, what did you learn being a trustee? What did I learn? I think today is February 24th. Am I correct? So what I learned after all these meetings and all these conference calls is that today, around the world, many people went to their first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Many people crossed the line, came under the exit sign, and for the first time in their life, were exposed to our wonderful fellowship. About a year from now, let's just call it February 2019, some of those people at the end of the month, whether it's the last Thursday or the first Friday or the second Saturday morning, whatever it is where they go to meetings, will go and celebrate 1 year sober. And they'll go there probably with family members. Family members who have tears in their eyes because they can't understand how all the love and all the money couldn't put John or Jane back together again. But somehow this ragtag group that kind of looks like a combination between the Island of Misfit Toys and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Star Wars bar, right? This gathering of misfits, this gathering of characters, somehow this group of people have been able to do something that no one else has been able to do. Now, I've also learned that today is a very different day for another group of people. I know today that there are people who suffer from the disease that I suffer from that were alive yesterday on February 23rd, 2018, that are not with us today because of the vicious, progressive, fatal disease that I have. I also know there are some people yesterday that had individual physical freedom and liberty, and because of something that happened yesterday or last night, they might not ever be physically free again. I know that things happened yesterday and last night that have totally devastated families. Things that can never be changed. And so it's easy to talk about commas and semicolons and guidelines and what side I'm on at a particular issue for this year's conference. And I'm not saying that's not important. But at the end of the day, we're here because we suffer from a fatal illness. We suffer from something that is killing so many people. Last night I had the great privilege to moderate the GSR roundtable. And, you know, it's so exciting to be in a room of people that are starting their service journey. And it's hard to explain, you know, if I knew what I know today when I started, I wish I could go back, but that's not how it works. It just doesn't work that way. Today, when I see someone in AA at an event like this that I probably don't ordinarily agree with on certain topics, I have a different view. What I see today is someone who 2 years at a time, 2 years after 2 years after 2 years, has dedicated and sacrificed their life to the fellowship that was here when I needed to come here. A lot different perspective than maybe one I used to have. You know, and last night I was very honest to the GSRs. I told them, you go to your assemblies, your job is to ask tough questions. And the leader's job there is to encourage you asking tough questions. I'm a big fan of the sixth concept. You cannot reach your spiritual aim unless you are first an effective business operation. Sometimes we think business is a bad word, but it's not really bad. It's just been made bad by certain people. Over the last 20 years, unfortunately, some of the worst crimes in America were committed by business people. So people hear business and they think evil, and I can't blame them. But that's not the business Bill was talking about when he wrote the sixth concept. He was talking about a business that means open and transparent and ethical and honest and accountable. You know, I know what it's like to be a young delegate because I was one. And I would like to tell you that I think it is possible to embrace the traditions, yet accept change. I do not think those things are not possible. You can honor what's in the first 164 pages of the big book. You can embrace our 12 traditions and 12 concepts, yet it's okay to have a new idea. I told the GSRs last night that sometimes I think we send a mixed message in service. We tell people, we need you, we need you, we need you. But whatever you do, don't bring any new ideas. We just need you, right? We need you, but not the new ideas. And we all know about Rule 62. It's already come up at the microphone a couple of times since I've heard it. But we never talk about Rule 63, which is, this is how we've always done it, right? We love Rule 63. But I've learned some lessons over time. I remember being at an assembly. It doesn't matter where it was. But I remember being at an assembly, and I remember seeing a young woman who was given her report and dared change. She was going to try something new. It was her first time at this committee. She was the new chair, and she had a new idea. And I remember watching a past delegate not too happy. And I remember looking at her face as she listened to what this past delegate had to say. And I sometimes think, you know, when Dr. Bob talked about watching our erring tongue, he meant at microphones at assemblies. He wasn't just talking about how you talk to your loved ones. He meant microphones at Narassa. But thank God the next person who got up was a past trustee who went up to the microphone, and all he did was say to this young woman, "Thank you. And I can't wait to hear what your next report is at the next assembly. I can't wait to hear what happens from this change you're proposing." And it's ideas like that that really make us better. I know what it's like to be a young delegate and have a past delegate call you on the phone and say, "You know what your problem is?" And I'm like, "I have a feeling, I have a few, but he said, your problem is you're friends with too many of the people who have tattoos and metal in their face." And I said, okay. But what the hell does that have to do with Alcoholics Anonymous? Like, what am I guilty of? I'm guilty that I was a young person who, by some God's grace, had the ability to read English. And when I showed up at my first assembly, I was able to have a service manual that I could read and understand in my own language. I was able to get minutes in the language I speak. I was able to listen in the language that I can listen to. I'm not sure if that wasn't like that, if I would be able to say that I was a past trustee today. So I'm some politically correct lunatic just because I think we should translate certain things. I don't think that has anything to do with being politically correct. I just want every new GSR who's willing to sacrifice their life and walk in and go to an assembly or a district meeting or a Narassa, I want them to have every same opportunity that I had. That's it. Has nothing to do with being politically correct, nothing to do with politics. I just want to make sure that they're given the same opportunity. You know, and Craig, as you know, probably told me what to talk about, right? Because you know, that's how it goes here. I'm in Connecticut, so I have my outline of what he wanted me to cover. But then I get to decide what I really want to cover or not. But I've seen certain things over the last 20 to 28 years in service. I've seen trends. I've seen things happen. I've seen changes, good, bad, indifferent. The three legacies are as important today as they were on Mother's Day 1935. I think one of the things I've seen happen is what a good friend of mine would call legacy skipping. And I hope that we can maybe change that in the service structure a little bit. We get a lot of people who are 2, 4, 6 years sober who become GSRs, and then at assemblies we focus a lot on the concepts. And we forget about the traditions in the middle. And I told the GSRs last night that nothing against anyone that was sitting in the delegates round table, but the best service sponsors in Alcoholics Anonymous are our literature. AA Comes of Age, Language of the Heart, the AA Group Pamphlet, the Traditions Illustrated, the Concepts Illustrated, the Service Manual. I was very honest with them last night that, one way you did your job with a service sponsee is that they're willing to raise their hand opposite than you in a vote in front of you. Like, if all they do is believe what I say, have I really transmitted anything? And is my job really to give them an answer, or is it to point them to the literature to let them find their own informed answer? Because I don't think service sponsorship was ever meant to be political parties. It was never meant that I'm going to stand for a position and you should vote for me because I'm in this lineage. Service sponsorship is just supposed to be guiding people through service and pointing them in the direction where they can find their own answers. But another thing, and I know there was a topic today about politics, sometimes I think because of the very nature of our disease, we confuse compromise with politics. Compromise is not something easy that comes to most alcoholics. I know that's shocking. But compromise is a part of our service structure. Compromise is a part of making sure that any change we make, everybody is included in the decision, the majority and the minority. If you read Bill's writings about the minority opinion, it has little to do with trying to change the majority. It has more to do about our treasured unity and making sure that the side that just lost a vote knows that how they feel is important to those of us that were on the side that won. That's really what the minority opinion is about. I want to change directions a little bit. I'm a real alcoholic, and I'm not afraid to say that. I don't have time to tell my story tonight. But I'm a real alcoholic as defined in the doctor's opinion, and more about alcoholism. I'm exactly that type. I am the allergic type. Some people I've heard say they crossed a line. I've never seen that line. I don't know where that line is. It was not in the woods when I had my first 8-pack of the Miller Small Pony bottles, okay? There was no line there. I've liked getting hammered since the beginning of my drinking. I come from a family that doesn't believe in alcoholism, or didn't believe in alcoholism. Now, thank God, through AA and Al-Anon, we've had a little change in my family and cousins and new generations. But literally, I was raised that we don't talk about alcoholism. We don't equate anyone's problems and draw them back to alcohol or alcoholism. We have other code words that we use. In my family, not all drinking counts as drinking, and that's kind of crazy, right? Like, if I was just had a simple beer in my hand, when we use the term drinking with the ing, that delineates a mission. That means that you are going out and getting hammered, and where it's going to end you do not know. You know, when I say drinking, that's what I mean. But I suffer from that allergy. I've never been able to not keep drinking once I start. And then worse than that, the next day, like the book says, regardless of the consequences of the night before or the month before or anything else, I like to get up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I like to hope that there's one cigarette left in the pack of cigarettes on my nightstand, right? I like to hope that there's something to light it with so I don't have to use the stove and maybe set myself on fire. I like to then get to a Dunkin' Donuts or a 7-Eleven and get a cup of coffee or an iced tea and a new pack of cigarettes. But then within an hour or an hour and a half, I will realize that I am again uncomfortable in my own skin. And like the book talks about, the only way I know to be comfortable again is to light the fuse, to take the first drink. There's a lot of confusing things you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous. I know I was a teenage member of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I heard people say the first drink got them drunk, I felt sorry for them, right? Like I'm a good drinker, right? I'm a person who went to DWI school when I was still in high school, right? Like, I had identified that it was the first shot after the 8th beer that caused me the trouble, right? It was definitely not my first drink. But, you know, the book goes on to talk a lot about our alcoholic ego. Because when you see people go and live long, successful, sober lives, it's amazing what you can accomplish sober. Except there is one thing, as small as it looks to other people, that I cannot do ever. I cannot take one drink. I know that I have no left kidney. I know that I have no spleen. I know I ruptured both of them. I know that my ribs have been broken many times. Like, I know all of that happened, but that's not the insanity that they're talking about in the step. The insanity is that when I felt uncomfortable in my own skin, regardless of the consequences of the night before, I decided to take the first drink. And I have no problem saying that I'm, a real alcoholic. Now, one of the things I've noticed, it's funny, because obviously I've been in the court system a little bit as a teenager and in my early 20s. And, I encourage anyone who's new in service here, do your own research. Don't believe a thing I say. Don't believe a thing anyone on the panel says. They quote a source, look it up. They say Bill said something, find out where. They say Bill wrote something and read part of a letter, get the whole letter. I love that we spend a lot of time arguing about court cards. It's probably one of my favorite all-time pet peeves in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because when you think back, a man named Ebby had done something dumb again and appeared in a court in Vermont. And two men, Seaber Graves and Roland Hazard, there's a judge there, a very logical, probably educated judge. Ebby was not a first-time appear in court. He was like a, 50-time loser. By all logic, he should have been sent to jail again. Instead, two kind of crazy people, because the Oxford group wasn't known, it was new. And two men say to the judge, hey, give him to us. Give us a chance. We have this first century Christianity Oxford group thing going. Let him come back to the farm we have in Vermont. Without that judge taking a shot that day, we're not all in Cromwell, Connecticut tonight. Let's just be as honest as we can be. We are not all sitting here tonight. And sometimes we look at Alcoholics Anonymous like miracles, like one miracle happened. On Mother's Day 1935, a man named Bill met a man named Bob, and we're here today. But I'm here to report that miracles have been happening by the thousands as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous since Mother's Day of 1935. Sometimes we're just so focused on the early history that we forget that things have been going on. And I'm a big fan of miracles and miracle documentation. But what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous is that we have a very hard time seeing them in our own life. That's why it's so good to see other people who are in Alcoholics Anonymous, because you can see that they are having miracles happen in their life. One of my favorite miracles, I don't know if I'll need my notes, but one of my favorite miracles is, I'm a New Yorker by birth. I've been to Akron a few times. I've been to Founders Day a couple of times. I love that little hokey thing they do in Ohio, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home. And I admit that at one time in my sobriety, I'm a guy who would be like, well, welcome home, but a New Yorker had to come here to start it, right? Like, I understand that it's Ohio, but it seems to me that a guy came from Brooklyn. But the truth is, because I like history a little bit, for me, and I'm sure there's somebody here from Worcester, Massachusetts in this room, right? Yeah? For me, the birthplace of Alcoholics Anonymous is Worcester, Massachusetts. Because that's like where I think the real miracle that had us all sitting here tonight happened. You know, at the time, the leading psychiatrist in the world was Sigmund Freud. And if you know anything about 1909 in Worcester, Massachusetts, Clark University was celebrating its 20th anniversary of being only the second university in America to offer graduate programs. And Sigmund Freud, if you were to look him up, you would see that he has made a lot of important talks at Clark during that time. None of that is important to Alcoholics Anonymous. None of it. I'm glad he made some good talks there. Happy for him. What's more important is that when Sigmund Freud was getting ready to make the trip to America, he had a young protege doctor working for him named Carl Jung. And Carl Jung basically came on that trip to carry his bags. And while Sigmund Freud was being important, Carl Jung was waiting in the hallways, and he ran into a man named William James, the psychiatrist from Harvard, who wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience. And if you study history, you'll know that basically 3 years after that, in 1912, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud parted ways. Because William James put in Carl Jung's head that day that since the beginning of time, there had been certain people who had spiritual upheavals, complete spiritual realignments, and that they were as basically rare as getting struck by lightning, but that it was possible. And I don't need to finish that story, but you know that there was a famous businessman who went to see a doctor in Europe, Dr. Jung, who then winds up with the first court card case in Vermont, who then winds up, that gentleman, taking a subway over to Brooklyn to introduce Bill to a couple of principals. But you know us, we'd rather argue on whether Ebby used a dime or a nickel to get a subway. Meanwhile, one of the most important events of the whole 20th century happened right there at that kitchen table. I mean, I tell people a lot. There's a speaker, she doesn't speak too much anymore, named Peggy M., but I've always loved her talks because she always talks about the great forgetter, that alcoholics are selfish by nature, self-centered, and that we get this great life in Alcoholics Anonymous, but then we're driving home from wherever we're driving home from, and we start to feel sorry for ourselves. I don't get to ride my motorcycle enough. I don't get to golf enough. Whatever it is that you do. And our first natural reaction is to tell ourselves, I got too much AA in my life. I need to cut back on this AA. And that's really incredible because in 1998, Time magazine was preparing for the 21st century. And so they gathered together a committee of the smartest history professors in the world. And they told that committee, not AA archivists, not AA delegates, history professors. And they told that committee, listen, we want to publish a book in 2000 called The 80 Days That Changed the World. So we need you to look from January the 1st, 1900 until today. And we need you to identify what are the 80 most important days. Now, if you multiply 365 by 98, you know it's a lot of days. If you go in my house today on a coffee table, it's really the only thing that I have out in the open. I have that book, The 80 Days That Changed the World. Sometimes you can get it on eBay. You can still find one. Because if you go 13 stories in, you land on Mother's Day, 1935, where it says, on this day, a broken stockbroker from New York met a broken surgeon from Akron. And from that formed the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And since then, millions of lives have been changed, and not only have alcoholics been helped, but they've shared their solution with people who have other problems. And I think I constantly have to remind myself, do I treat Alcoholics Anonymous like it's one of the 80 most important days of the 20th century? Do I really need to ride my motorcycle, go to the gym, whatever it is, go to another Yankee game, whatever? Or am I really doing my part for Alcoholics Anonymous? I know it's a conference agenda item, which I have no opinion on. But it is incredible that soon after that book was published, the Library of Congress decided that they wanted to publish a list of the 88 most important books that have impacted the United States of America since the Library of Congress started. And that list is in alphabetical order, so you only have to go to number 2, where you will see the book Alcoholics Anonymous, Works Publishing, April 1939. I mean, sometimes I really have to ask myself, this is the outside world who says it's one of the 88 most important books. This is the outside world who says it's one of the 80 days that changed the whole century. It's not us. And do we really treat it with the respect it deserves if the outside world believes that about it? You know, if you're a new GSR here or new to service, I'm sure that you probably go to some of your home group business meetings, and I'm sure what we did here is very well received when it's reported, and I'm sure they make motions to extend your business meetings by a couple of hours, to have special meetings to hear the report from the RASA. But one of the secrets of being a servant in Alcoholics Anonymous is respecting all of AA for what they do in their part. That there's nothing special about all of us here at Narasa. That everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous has a gift. We all don't have the same gifts. There are some people who can drive people to and from meetings that can work miracles in the front seats of those cars. There are some people who've been answering phones at central offices and intergroups who have the ability to talk someone off the ledge that I'm jealous of. And if you're a servant in general service in Alcoholics Anonymous, the trick is to be able to go back to the front lines of Alcoholics Anonymous and speak in a way that resonates with their experience. Not preach to them, not dictate to them, but honor their work on the front lines of Alcoholics Anonymous and let them see the connection between an AA home group, a district, an area, and the general service office, and why all of them are super important. You know, we argue about the seventh tradition all the time, and God knows the politics word comes up with that. You know, and one of the downfalls of service, one of the great things about working with people, taking them through our big book, meeting them when they're brand new to AA, one of the great things about that is you get to see the results usually. good or bad, you get to see the results. The difficult part about service is that we're a perpetual snowball of facilitating 12-step work, that a lot of times something we're involved in, we don't get to see the end of. We don't get to see the life changed or saved. And that's a difficult part. But if you're new in service, I'll give you a little story that you can put in the back of your little tool for that person at the home group who really gives you a hard time. Why do they need money? What do they do with that money? Money is nothing more than a tool and a vehicle to ensure that miracles keep happening. We don't need a lot of it, but we need enough of it to make sure that that miracle keeps going on. And one of my favorite stories about miracles is that in June of 1983, there was a young Marine member of AA named Jay. And Jay wrote the General Service Office. He had just been sent to a place called Beirut, Lebanon. And he told the office who he wrote to that he needed literature badly. And so the office sent him a letter and literature back, and Jay wrote back a month later thanking them for the literature and used the military mail and said, please send me more. And a month later after that, Jay wrote back and actually used some wording out of our big book. He said, I have good news to report. He said, I've started the Peacekeepers group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we have a couple of locals and a couple of service people. And in between the trouble and the bombing and the shelling, we meet when we can. But I need more literature. Please send more literature. So they sent him more literature, and he wrote back another time. And then they didn't hear from Jay for a couple of months. And in December of 83, they got a letter in the military mail. And it was from another member who said they had the very heartbreaking job of reporting that Jay, who they'd been writing with, had been killed in the bombing of the barracks in October of 83, where like 274 or 75 Marines were killed. But they wanted them to know that the group was still going. And I tell you that story because I don't know who put money in a basket in 1979 or 80 or 81. I don't know who was really hiring people at the office. I don't know who was sitting on that assignment. I guess I could pull the letter and I could refresh the name. But what I do know is that most of you have a smartphone. And that if you Googled Alcoholics Anonymous in Lebanon right now, you would probably see that on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday nights at 8:30 p.m., there's a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because a young man named Jay, who needed some literature, wrote a letter, and for some reason we had a couple of extra dollars to send him a book, and a month later write him again and send him some more literature. Like, I know Jay died a hero, but I would love to run into one of Jay's siblings one day and let them know that he started a fellowship. There's a young member of the Irish Defense Forces named Noli. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was washing my motorcycle last summer, and I got a phone call through Facebook. And I answered it, and it was Noli. He was in the desert right outside in Lebanon, a member of a NATO peacekeeping force. But he called me because he was so excited, because he said to me, he said, Billy, last week we had the weekend off, and I went into Beirut, and I went to Jay's meeting. And I was so happy to tell everybody there who didn't know where this meeting came from. But that's the miracle of service. That's what we carry out that maybe we don't see the end of. You know, I only have a couple of minutes left, so I just want to talk a little bit about communication. Because obviously it's an important part of Alcoholics Anonymous today. It's the one thing from Bill I do want to read, because his genius is amazing to me. Nothing matters more to AA's future welfare than the manner in which we use the colossus of modern communication. used unselfishly and well, it can produce results far surpassing our present imagination. I mean, us not using digital technology today would like not using the phone. The phone was an integral part of AA recovery at one time. Still is today. But it's today more for communication between members already here. Another difficult thing about being involved in service of Alcoholics Anonymous is while it's nice that we have a NARASA, and it's nice that the delegates go to New York, and it's nice that we have a lot of nice meetings, the structure's secondary purpose is us. Its primary purpose is the alcoholic who's not here yet. That's the number one responsibility of the service structure, to make sure, because a person like me tends to be selfish, to make sure that an alcoholic on February 24th, 2018 has the same AA to come to that I had on January the 5th of 1990. I want to talk a little bit because I think anonymity and affiliation are causing us issues these days. It's probably going to be the subject of many discussions, I would imagine, over the next 10 years. I mean, I heard people talking about anonymity, and I just want to say it's hard for me to swallow. And people say, why? Because I always hear us picking on celebrities. This celebrity did this celebrity did that. I never hear people picking on this trustee did that, this delegate did that. Because I know that it was very unpopular for me as a trustee to ask the General Service Board to have a social media policy just for trustees. Because I saw some things that were out of hand. Whether it was the 11th tradition or the 12th. And then I see the comments. Somebody's traveling somewhere, thanks for your service, or all these things that have nothing to do. There's two types of anonymity in this fellowship. There is the press, radio, and film, and then there is the humility talked about in the 12th tradition. And the early writings on the 12th tradition are clear. We do this without any reward or recognition. Zero reward or recognition. The only reason we do this is because our life depends on it. But how do we expect other people to observe and respect traditions 11 and 12 if we're not willing as a fellowship to step up to the plate and say, you know what? The leaders in Alcoholics Anonymous better get a handle on what's going on. And I know it's probably controversial for me to mention this, but I am not going to start telling other people what to do on Facebook until the leaders of Alcoholics Anonymous decide that they're going to set the example. I know 4 months ago what I saw. There was an event on the other side of the world that a trustee posted pictures of. And yes, they did not use the words Alcoholics Anonymous, but they used the words of the name of that event and pictures of that room. And then what do I see but every delegate in the world and past delegate chiming on with comments. If I'm a newcomer to Alcoholics Anonymous, why would I listen to anybody talking about anonymity if the leaders of this fellowship are not ready to finally take a look at it and say, we need a policy? If you're going to serve at the level and take the fancy title, then we should have a policy for how we act in anonymity on social media. Same with affiliation. Affiliation line is getting blurred every day. The last couple of things I want to talk about are singleness of purpose, for sure. Because it's funny that in the past I've been accused of being very liberal on singleness of purpose, even though I have no drugs in my story. But I want to be very clear. Unless Cromwell, Connecticut is the first place, I've yet to ask anyone who's an AA member if they have no other problems and have somebody come up and say, oh, I'm the person you've been looking for. I'm an alcoholic and I have no other problems, nothing. I have yet to meet that person. But the truth is, especially because I moved and I got some anonymity back going to meetings, there's a crisis in this country. And it might be a crisis that doesn't involve alcohol, but there is a crisis. The opiate epidemic is sweeping this country. And I'm just going to share my experience with you. Not an outside issue, my experience as an AA member. I am meeting many people who tell me that they are not alcoholic. Some have never drank, but yet I have to see rest in peace notices on Facebook for people who have OD'd while they're attending AA meetings, who have told people they never drank. And there's a lot we can do. I've had to reprogram my brain. I have to keep NA and DAA and CA meeting directories in my car. It's not accountable or responsible for me to put down other 12-step fellowships in Alcoholics Anonymous. If I meet some young kid at a meeting, how am I going to expect him to go to another fellowship if I'm busy putting it down? For me to say, oh, there's no solution in whatever fellowship I choose to pick on, instead of doing the footwork and getting a few phone numbers of people in CA and NA and DAA who are doing the deal and taking people through the steps and doing service and being able to connect people with them, like that's my responsibility. My responsibility is to be of service to God and those about me. There's no extra line there that says only in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I like to end because I don't have a lot of time tonight, but I think my mother had the best view of Alcoholics Anonymous. Are there any members of Al-Anon here? Good. Thank you. I'm not a speaker who has any Al-Anon jokes. In fact, at one time in my life, I couldn't stand Al-Anon. You know, there's a lot of people who say that there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA. That's not my story. My story is there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and your mom's head full of Al-Anon, right? That's my story. But there's a lot of things you can hear in AA that aren't in the book, which is the greatest reason to take people through the big book and other literature so they can know what AA is and, more importantly, what AA isn't. I mean, there's another phrase that you hear in meetings all the time. My worst day sober is better than my best day drinking. That is absolutely not my story. It is not even remotely close to my story. I mean, I'm not sure. I guess their life was perfect when they got sober. I mean, I'll just tell you, going to a correctional facility a couple months sober, not better than Fort Lauderdale spring break 1986, right? Not even close. Not even close. I didn't always talk this well and nice about Al-Anon. But if my mother was not in it, I would not be your speaker. So let me end this with her words, because they're much better than mine. My mother died 2000, Christmas of 1999. She was in a hospice. In fact, I went to her funeral 2 days before I went to the board weekend as a delegate chair in 2000. But Christmas Eve 1999, I wrapped my mom's last gift at her house in Long Island while my other siblings wrapped and drank. And the next morning I got up, Christmas Day. I got her wig, her Charlie perfume, pictures of her cat, a boombox, crazy Irish music she listened to, because this was going to be her last Christmas. She would die 3 weeks later, and a lot of the relatives would be coming by to see her. And then I stopped at Dunkin' Donuts and got 2 large coffees. Went to see my mom, pushed up the back of her bed, climbed up and sat right next to her, and we threw back 2 Dunkin' Donuts coffees like we were drinking 2 tall boys. And if you've ever dealt with someone that's at that part of their life, they hallucinate sometimes. Sometimes they're there. Sometimes you're like, what's going on? But at one point she looked at me and said, Billy, don't ever leave AA. And I said, of course not, Mom. And she said, AA gave me the ability to get a quart of milk. So I let that sit in for a couple of seconds. And then I just said, Mom, what does a quart of milk have to do with Alcoholics Anonymous? And she said, you don't know what it's like to be the spouse or the parent or the brother or the boyfriend or the girlfriend of an active alcoholic. She said, because what it was like for me is that if I ran out of milk at night, I would think about going to the store, but then I would think to myself, well, if I go to the store at night, the stores aren't really crowded. And if it's not really crowded, I might run into somebody I know. And if I run into somebody I know, they might ask me the hardest question anyone could ever ask me, which was, how are your children? Or how is Billy? And she said, so I'd rather do without and go when the store is crowded. She said, but at a certain point in your sobriety, I couldn't wait to go to the store when it was empty. I couldn't wait for somebody to walk up and say, how are your children? And I couldn't wait to talk about the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon family groups and let other people know that recovery is possible. I think my mother sums up Alcoholics Anonymous much better than I do. I want to thank everybody here for your service and the time you took away from your families and everything else you do, because I know it's a big sacrifice. But Alcoholics Anonymous is critical to people who have the same disease as us. So thank you very much.